Hey everyone, it's Sarah. Spirit of Saturday, so I decided to come back a little bit. I'm going to be leaving again in a little bit too, but I decided to come back for a couple of weeks. Yeah, so today the topic that Elena and I are doing is based on sort of seeking treatment early and how absolutely, crucially, imperatively important that is. When it comes to eating disorders, time is really the enemy. Time is, the more time you spend in your eating disorder, the harder it gets to treat, the harder it gets to deal with eventually, and the harder it is to get out. I know that personally in my clinic, the people that we see who don't ever relapse are people who have had eating disorders for less than a year. Most people who have eating disorders for longer than that are subject to relapse quite quickly. And a few times after that, just because it's so hard to break that cycle of pattern. And so it's just, that's the other thing, is you don't have to have an eating disorder to seek treatment for an eating disorder. You can have issues with food. You can have, feelings around food that are unhealthy. You can be unhappy. You can feel lost. There are so many things that you can do, and feel, and get therapy for those. Like, you don't need to wait till you have an eating disorder to get therapy. Like, that's a bad idea. It's really, these eating disorders are very resistant to treatment. The more stuck you are in it, the more harder it is to treat, the more intensely you have to treat it. People with eating disorders who aren't, are not in a place where they've had them for a long time are often treated on like an outpatient basis, and it works really, really well because they can still stay in life and they can still be accomplishing something and living at the same time. They don't have to interrupt and go into like an inpatient setting and be like tube bed and all that kind of thing. That's the ideal form of treatment, is that you don't stop living. And these are very subject to relapse, and the more you know your eating disorder, the less you know anything else in life, and the more you know your eating disorder, and the less you know anything else in life, that's what you're going to turn to at times. Stress. And we all get stressed. There's no way around that, unfortunately. That's basically, I would say, what the major advantage of getting treatment early is that your life remains intact. You can still go to school, you can still participate in friendships and relationships with family and that kind of thing. Maybe you're going to groups a couple of times a week, or maybe you're going to therapy a couple of times a week, but you're not stopping life. And in that way, it's far, far easier to transition from your eating disorder to normal life, because you have a normal life going on. You don't have to start from scratch, which is really, really important, because once you get out of an inpatient or a really intensive outpatient program, if you have nothing to go back to, the first thing you're going to go back to is your eating disorder. And obviously, that's not really a very healthy thing, and so the more you have in your life outside of your eating disorder, the easier it is to let go of your eating disorder. The more you have outside of your eating disorder, the more, the less lost you are in your eating disorder. So you know that, yes, you have an eating disorder, but you also go to school, and you also participate in a sport, and you also have really good friendships, and you also have children and family and whatever. That's really, really important. If you can keep your life intact, that works really, really well. I know that the TBT program that I was in, that was one of the only requirements, was that you were doing something outside of therapy, so that you could see and you could function as a real person in the real world. And your eating disorder doesn't really have a career or your reason for being or whatever. It's just you have something else inside of that, and that's really, really important. And sometimes when you get so ingrained in your eating disorder, you can lose that. But that takes years. Like, most people who start having an eating disorder will lose everything only after a very long time. For me, it took 7 years. And, some people it takes 10, some people it takes 20, but you will not have an eating disorder for 3 months and lose everything. That doesn't usually typically happen. Eating disorder doesn't progress that quickly, kind of, if that makes any sense. It's just, eventually your eating disorder mandates that you give up everything, and it doesn't usually do that in 3 months. Like, you usually have enough to hold on to. You don't stop going to school, you don't stop having a family, you don't alienate friends enough that, you don't have that left. The other thing, too, is that eating disorders are very, very good at driving people away. Eventually, an eating disorder, I've seen it time and time again, will drive family away. It will drive friends away. It will drive significant others away. And people get tired of it. People are going to be far more likely to remain with you and remain in an intact relationship and a functional relationship if they don't have to be constantly giving or worrying about you, giving to you or worrying about you. When you seek treatment early, and you still, again, have something left other than the eating disorder, you're still in a functional relationship with them. But eventually it gets to the point where you often alienate your family and your friends so much that you don't have them anymore. Again, I'm in that spot too. It's not a very nice spot. It's a very, very lonely spot. So if you can get and intervene before that happens, your chances for a meaningful recovery are 1,000-fold higher. You don't have to, again, you don't have to start over. You don't have to start making new friends. You don't have to start making in your family, if that's possible. You don't have to start all over again, which is kind of nice, and it's really, really helpful. The other thing, too, is that eating disorder is a really, really bad cycle. The more ingrained in it you are, and the more involved in it you are, the more the disordered thoughts make a lot of sense. And when you have those disordered thoughts, obviously you're not being nourished well enough. And when you're not being nourished well enough, countering those disordered thoughts makes it even, it's impossible. So the more malnourished you are, the more symptomatic you are, the less in a position you are to get out of those thoughts. So it's like a vicious cycle, and eventually you end up being so sick that you have nothing left to fight against this eating disorder, and it's, everything makes sense about the eating disorder, nothing makes sense in the real world, and you look kind of psychotic, except that you're not psychotic. Like, the way you think and feel about food is just totally wrong, and totally unrealistic, and totally just not at all making sense with the real world. But it makes sense to you because your eating disorder is taking advantage of the fact that you're being very, very malnourished, and it's, imposing its values and its morals and whatever, if it has any or whatever, but it just keeps imposing on you, and you have less and less to sort of think about it wisely. The other thing too is obviously eating disorders cause a lot of really severe and irreparable damage to your bodies eventually. Most people with an eating disorder for a short period of time, the damage isn't necessarily irreparable. Your metabolism does bounce back. If you don't get to a very, very low rate, you don't end up atrophying your muscles. If you get to a point where you can gain weight fast, you don't worry about osteoporosis, and when I say fast, I mean like medically fast. I don't mean like 20 pounds next week kind of thing. And you manage to get out of all of those side effects for the most part. I mean, yeah, you do hear about people who die in 3 months after having an eating disorder because of electrolyte imbalances and that kind of thing. But if you can make it through treatment after a short eating disorder, you know, in 5, 6, 7, 8 years time, nobody's going to know this because your body will recover. You know, whereas if you've had an eating disorder for 15, 20 years, your body won't ever, you know, your stomach will always have problems, your esophagus will always have problems if you're perjured. You know, you might always have digestion problems, parts of your digestive tract can become innervated so that doesn't work anymore, and you might have chronic heart problems, or it's just, the more you engage in your eating disorder, the more you damage your body, and the more you damage your body, the less the body can do something about it when it gets to a healthy spot.